Yes, it's good now. Oh, sorry.
Thanks. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Khafir, members of Parliament, to the viewing public. Madam Chair, I would like to start off with a request, because in the previous meeting there was also a comment made. Is it possible, at least to me as Minister of Finance, or maybe even to the Council of Ministers, a list of all outstanding meetings be sent? I've requested that in 2022 also. We haven't received that as yet. In addition to that, a list of all outstanding letters that was sent, because there's a sort of an insinuation that we aren't attending meetings and so forth. I'm pretty sure that I'm up to date with all my meetings. I think this was the only one that was outstanding, and I'm pretty sure we're also pretty up to date with the letters that were sent. Besides maybe the one that was recently referred to by MP Sarah Scott Williams. But if you could have that sent, please, that would be very much appreciated. In regards to the presentation for today, and the point about the cryptocurrency also, I think you said that, but also we also concluded that meeting on cryptocurrency. So it was concluded, it wasn't a meeting to come back to. And I'm also willing and wanting to come back again on cryptocurrency, and even more in particular to blockchain, as I said in that meeting also. So I have no problem if another meeting is being scheduled for those comments. The meeting today is, and the last point by MP Sarah Scott Williams, we have this committee meeting. MP did request a public meeting, I believe also, but also our ministry also, myself, we also requested a meeting on tax reform. So it's 3 different meetings that were requested, one by the MP, one by myself, and then we also had the committee meeting, which I think is the right process. I do believe the process should be handled in the committee first, as we're doing, and then into central committee meeting, and then public meeting. So I do believe, Madam Chair, that we are following the right procedures and order in regards to the tax improvements. I'd like to start my presentation by saying that taxes are important for government because they provide the main source of revenue for funding for government programs and services such as education, infrastructure, healthcare, public safety. They also play a crucial role in redistributing the wealth and financing public goods and services for the benefit of society as a whole. Additionally, taxes help to regulate the economy by encouraging or discouraging certain types of economic activity. But in the last 3 years, sitting in this position, I've also been able to sit with different stakeholders, and in particular, the years of 2021, 2022, the 2 years after the pandemic, or when the pandemic was tapering off. There were particular industries that we would have meetings with, and every industry that we met almost would say that they had their best year ever, or the best year of the last decade, or the best year of the last 5 years. And when we see these different industries making these comments, and then we look at government's revenue, we don't see the uptick, right? So it's not a reflection of what is happening in our economy. With that being said, that means with us, that leads us to assume that there is a lot of leakages when it comes to taxes or income. And that's one of the reasons why we're here today, to discuss our tax improvements for government. No, let's get back now. Go back to full screen. The tax framework will be fully reviewed within the focus of broadening the tax base, shifting from direct to indirect taxes, reduction of the deductible items of exemptions, limiting administrative influence on the implementation of tax laws and regulations. For this, we formed a work group. The work group consists of the Secretary General, the Fiscal Affairs Department, the Cabinet of the Minister of Finance, and representatives of the Dutch Ministry of Finance. Leave it there. The work group advises to create a robust and simplified tax framework with the following important aspects: a limited number of tax bases with a high yield potential, long-term stable yields, sufficient revenues to cover the intended level of expenditure, broad bases, so with as few deductions as possible, foundations that fit the shoulders that can bear the most, also contribute the most, based with economic incentives, principles that are easily enforceable, a system that with a limited capacity of the tax administration is still adequately feasible. With that being said, we go to the position paper. In the first meeting, I believe, on taxes, MP Sarah Westcott Williams did ask, sorry?
My apologies, Minister. Just a quick question, because the presentation that we received is different than the one you're doing. I just want to make sure that that is
No, so this is the
as
correct
it's supposed to
presentation.
be. Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes, in the last meeting that we had in regards to taxes, MP Sarah Westcott Williams did ask a particular question, and that question was, what is the position of government? And with that question, we went back and when we initially came, we had a discussion on items that were presented to us by IMF, Central Bank, our own department, the representatives of the finance ministry in the Netherlands. And we went back and we said, look, we're going to start this process a little differently and include all the different stakeholders. So what we did was we created a sort of a position paper within the Ministry of Finance. With that position paper, we then went on to the different stakeholders, and we then had a position paper with the stakeholders, Ministry of Finance. We then had a position paper sent to the Council of Ministers, where they also had time to give feedback and so forth within their different departments and so forth. With that feedback given, we then established the position paper of the Council of Ministers. And then with that process, we also then went on to have meetings with the different stakeholders and so forth, taking in their feedback, and then we've come to the latest position paper. The improvement of the tax framework is in line with the main principles adopted by the Council of Ministers, reducing the complexity of the tax legislation, broadening the tax base, resulting in lowering the tax rates of personal income and wage tax, as well as the profit tax, a shift from direct taxes to indirect taxes, promote entrepreneurship, innovation, and employment. And it takes into account the recommendations in the 2021 report of the IMF Fiscal Affairs Department. The purpose. The purpose is primarily to clarify the main principles of the previously proposed improvements of the tax framework to be discussed with the stakeholders in St. Martin. On the other hand, there are too many tax proposals to consider, amend, or adjust within one legislative operation. For this reason, we have divided the implementation into crucial and relatively simple proposals on the one hand, and the legislative proposals that may be introduced at a later stage. The proposal for the first stage is, we propose to implement the following changes in the coming years. Indirect taxes, the elimination of the turnover tax, exemptions for casinos, and simultaneously abolishment of the fixed casino fees, which you currently have. The introduction of the gambling gaming tax for the winners. The elimination of the TOT exemptions for hotels, accommodations, and simultaneously abolishment of the room tax. An introduction of a small business scheme on St. Martin's TOT. A sin tax, a low rate that can also be implemented on excise duties on imports. Profit tax, the elimination of tax holidays and e-zone legislation, the elimination of surtaxes in the profit tax or adjustments of the profit tax rates, budget neutral abolishing or limiting the investment allowance scheme, the introduction of the facility for share managers, legal mergers, demerger, the postponement of the levying of profit tax, and the introduction of the OECD country-by-country rules. Wage and income tax. Introduction of notional wages schemes for shareholders holding a substantial share interest in companies, abolishing or limiting the investment allowance scheme, restricting or abolishing the investment credit scheme in the income tax, elimination of the retirement scheme, withdrawal of the deduction scheme for a specific category of foreign taxpayers, the elimination of surtaxes in income tax or an adjustment of the income tax rates, the introduction of a facility for share mergers, legal mergers, and demerger, dividend or revenue tax, introduction of the existing Dividend Withholding Tax Act 2000, inheritance tax, abolishment of inheritance tax and the gift tax, motor vehicle taxes, introducing a dual rate for motor vehicles with a higher tax rate above a certain weight. And then we have the General Taxes Management Act, temporary amendments of the voluntary disclosure scheme. Proposals for a later stage would be real property transfer tax, broadening the transfer tax base with a number of taxable events. Non-fiscal proposal, mandatory involvement, civil law notaries in share issues, share transactions. Introduction of the obligation to lay down any charge changes in the share ownership in a notarial deed. And then we have the codifications. In addition to the tax laws, there are many loose regulations that are necessary to implement the tax laws. Sometimes it is also unclear whether some of these regulations are legally valid in St. Martin because they were often drawn up in the time of the former Netherlands Antilles without a legal basis. This causes many implementation problems. To address this, it is important to codify these separate regulations as much as possible so that the tax system is simplified and it is the stakeholder sessions that we had. On May 18th, 19th, and the 20th, 2022, we organized a stakeholder sessions and gave presentations on tax framework. 3 notary offices that were represented, and we also met with the Foundation Tax Committee. The second one was with the Tax Administration, the Ministry of TIAT, SFV, VSA, and the Working Group Game Control Board, and the Central Bank of Curaçao and St. Martin. And the third stakeholder session was with the Chamber of Commerce, the Bankers Association, the St. Martin's Insurance Association, St. Martin Hospitality and Trade Association, and the wholesalers. The main feedback we received from the stakeholders are: take next to import, also export facilities into account. That TOT is damaging. TA2 has to be replaced. On the long run, do not implement other indirect taxes on top of TOT. 3, implement fiscal unity facility for TOT. Implement accelerated depreciation, maximized to 30%. Allow, what we say in Dutch, vervoegdere afschrijving and the vervangingsreserve. 6, implement share-to-share merger facilities. 7, keep the pensionado regime. 8, prevent double taxation. 9, exempt reissuance of long lease land from transfer tax. 10, keep the speelvergunningsrecht for casinos and abolish exemption for TOT. 11, tax foreign properties and decrease income tax rate. 12, create an equal level playing field and broaden the tax base by taxing the Airbnb. And 13, collaborate with the French side. The various measures that we propose the following measures to be implemented: an introduction of a small business scheme. So in a small business scheme, where we look to protect small entrepreneurs, where, for example, entrepreneurs under we are looking at an amount where, let's say, for example, entrepreneurs that make up to 75,000 guilders a year, that they basically wouldn't have to file their taxes. So it also causes less burden on the tax department, but also gives opportunity for small business, the micro, medium, and small business enterprises. We've looked at a couple of schemes, and especially given the last 2-3 years dealing with credits, the enterprise support project at NFRB and so forth, we see the importance of giving an extra push to our micro, medium, and small businesses. The withdrawal of the land tax, lowering profit tax, and abolish the surcharges, lowering wage tax, increase the free tax rate income, lower transfer tax for extension of long lease land, exemption of transfer tax for first home owners. And that one in particular was also based on a motion that I presented as a member of parliament, actually. At that time, looking to help and support persons purchasing their first home. And in that motion, a few items was presented, but also we had other discussions as members of parliament at that point in time. And when we look at first-time homeowners, one of the drawbacks for them is having the cash up front to make a deposit to pay the bank fees, notary fees, and transfer tax. So we believe by giving exemption to the transfer tax for first-time homeowners allows the possibilities for more persons to be able to buy their first home. And the abolishment of the inheritance tax and the gift tax. The implementation of measures that we see have to be in line with the introduction of other tax measures generating revenue. For this implementation of the tax improvements will take place in stages. After having received the questions and comments from the Finance Committee of Parliament, the Tax Improvements Group will then draft an advice for the Council of Ministers for approval, including the tax improvements to be part of the first stage. So again, as I mentioned before, why these committee meetings, especially the Finance Committee meetings, are important. With the questions posed, not just in the first, but now also in this one, we then take all those questions, feedback and comments into consideration, go back to the position paper again, realign or readjust, given that the members of parliament are also the representation of the people of St. Martin, and go back to the Council of Ministers again with the new document. After the approval from the Council of Ministers, the tax improvements will be drafted into legislation, and consultation sessions will be held with the stakeholders again before the actual concepts are submitted for Parliament's approval. Madam Chair, I believe that is the end of the presentation.
Thank you very much, Minister Irian, for the presentation. I look first to the Member of Parliament, Westcott Williams, or the floor. You have the floor.
Yeah, thank you. Madam Chair Lady, thank you and a good afternoon. And I thank the Minister for what he has presented and ask if, I just needed to have it confirmed, I think you asked it, Madam Chair Lady, that we will receive the presentation as made by the Minister as well. What we received was a different 8-page document, so okay, that's confirmed. And then the Minister alluded, and you too, Madam Chair Lady, if the necessity to have a follow-up meeting of this committee on the entire matter of cryptocurrency, blockchain, etc., and I would definitely ask that that be taken into consideration, that we do have a follow-up meeting on that. So that's sort of to the chair of this committee. Thank you for considering it. And Madam Chair Lady, if I look at the blossoming, unfortunately, I want to add, the blossoming lottery business on St. Martin, I ask if the government / the minister has, in the discussions regarding taxes, etc., considered a sort of a state lottery. So if persons are going to be, which apparently right now they are, and I think it's on the wrong premises that this is done, but are encouraged to buy lottery, why not create some type of a state lottery or something close to that? On that topic, my question is with respect to what the minister has presented in terms of changing the casino taxes, etc. My question is there a sort of a financial picture to this particular item in terms of this is what casinos and lotteries right now yield for the government, and with the changes as proposed by the minister, because we have not received any financial implications of the different measures compared to what we have now. And then the question is that in the case of the casino specifically, if the minister can present some global financial numbers as to what it means now and what it could mean in the future. And I'll get to why I asked specifically that question. Madam Chair Lady, reference was made by the minister to the sequence which the government would prefer in terms of having meetings of parliament, especially where the matter of taxes is concerned, and that a public meeting on taxes should come sort of at the end, committee meeting, central committee, etc. However, Madam Chair Lady, in our request for a public meeting, reference was made also specifically to that the tax reform should go hand in hand with the economic plans. We stated that in our request and wanted to get that from the government. How is that synchronization, if any, taking place? I also took, in the context thereof, I took note of the decision by the Ministry of Finance and that of the Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of TIAT with respect to a fiscal working group establishment. So there has been the establishment, and it's a fiscal working group. I'm sure the minister has the complete and formal name on the tip of his tongue. So, but it is a fiscal working group, and it has been created by the Ministries of Finance and of TIAT. I believe it was in late December that was done. And my question is that under or was that with the current Minister of TIAT? So is the current Minister of TIAT, given some of the statements that the minister has made with respect to his plans, was this fiscal working group, the creation thereof, is it in collaboration with the current Minister of TIAT, is my question. So the fiscal working group. And then, Madam Chair Lady, in a response to some previous questions that I had, the minister indicated that one of the intentions of the government at the time was to abolish pending draft legislation in its different stages. So the minister responded to me that it is the intention to abolish the different legislations which were in the preparation phase. Now, just before that sometime, we received from the Ministry of Finance, and I think the latest listing was with the budget 2019, and we received from the Ministry of Finance a list of legislation in preparation. Legislation, and I quote from that listing by the ministry, legislation in preparation up to be submitted to Parliament. With your indulgence, Madam Chair Lady, I'm going to run down that list as received, and if the minister can respond to the list and confirm that these legislations in draft will be abolished. because that was the statement. The legislation in preparation will be abolished. I have the listing. I'm going to run them down one by one and ask the minister to confirm, because they are in preparation phase to be submitted to Parliament back whenever. And so I'm going to do that with your indulgence. De landsverordening tot wijziging van de comptabiliteitsverordening in verband met de bevordering en de uitvoerbaarheid van aanbestedingen. Is this a draft to be abolished, yes or no? Landsverordening vertrekbelasting, which was in a concept phase, is that to be abolished? Landsverordening herziening formeel belastingrecht, which reached the nader rapport stage, is that to be abolished? Landsverordening tot wijziging van de landsverordening op de winstbelasting, which is in voorbereiding, also had a nader rapport, is that one to be abolished? De landsverordening tot wijziging van de algemene subsidieverordening, which also received another report, is that to be abolished? So in other words, when I say to be abolished, that the government is going to retract these draft legislations. And I would just like the minister to say yes, no, not for that one, for this one, yes, that going ahead, this one ain't going ahead. De landsverordening hervorming belastingstelsel St. Martin, which was in preparation, in voorbereiding, is that going to be taken off the table? We have de landsverordening tot wijziging van de precario rechten en retributieverordening, landsverordening reclamebelasting, RD's. These even went to the SER and it was supposed to be adjusted based on that advice. Is that one going to be abolished as well? And then we had, Madam Chair Lady, according to the government, there was a draft landsverordening, national ordinance, regelende de kwijtschelding van belastingschulden over de belastingjaren 2006 en daarvoor. And for that, the government said they have reconsidered that, not to have a landsverordening, not to have an ordinance, but they wanted to do something with the publicized policy regulation regarding this particular matter. As we can recall, that is a matter going back to the time of former Minister of Finance, Mr. Tuitt. So what is government's position on that, considering its intention to abolish all of these draft legislations? And then we had in 2018, with the assistance of the central bank, I believe at the time, there was a draft national ordinance that was called Landsverordening Belastingmaatregelen 2018 en Landsverordening Ontwikkelingsbank Sint Maarten, which together were fused into Landsverordening Ontwikkelingsbank en Inkomstenverhogende Maatregelen 2018, which was in preparation at the time. It suggests a draft national ordinance in which the government was intending to create a development bank for St. Martin, with an entire elucidation as to the reasons for having a development bank on St. Martin. And in that same draft ordinance, there were also some increased measures, or measures to increase revenue rather, that the government had put together in one draft ordinance. In that particular draft ordinance, hence my reference to casino fees, because in that draft ordinance, and as I mentioned, that was drafted together with the central bank, mention is made of an incremental increase in casino fees and such. That is why when I asked the question about the proposal now of the government regarding casino fees, abolishing what we have now to come with a new system, what are the financial implications or the financial benefits for the government of St. Martin? Because when members of parliament requested the public meeting on tax reform, and asked that we get an understanding as to how is the link made within the government between the finance ministry, which to a certain degree is correct, looks primarily at the issue of generating revenue. However, there are other ministries that I assume, while looking at tax reform, look at it from a slightly different angle. Of course, I took note of the minister's statement regarding small business. And based on that particular reference of the minister saying, looking at the developments with, for example, the ESP program and credits and whatever have you, has the minister or the government received any reports regarding these programs? Reports such as, these are some of the issues that our small businesses are facing when it comes to et cetera, et cetera. So are there any implications, not implications really, ramifications that the government has received based on the programs? Have you received an evaluation? What does it mean? Has any of this led to the government rethinking or developing a strategy regarding small business? So there are clearly some issues. There are clearly some issues regarding small business. Ministers know it. I know it. But has any report been made by these programs that would give you an idea to kind of go in a certain direction where small business is concerned? Of course, we have a beautiful, elaborate small business policy, but when it comes to the execution, it's a different matter altogether. So, Madam Chair, ladies, specifically that last draft ordinance that the government in its report to us said was there from 2018, and I would like to hear the minister's view on one. Those that I mentioned, are all of them to be abolished? And when I look at one pertaining to the development bank, I know the whole matter with the EDC that the minister has announced some time ago, and from press reports has now sort of pulled up, but that's for another time when I will be asking questions regarding that. But in the meantime, we have this particular ordinance that was drafted to increase the income of government. And I would like to hear the minister's response to those. Yes, no, we're not going to abolish that one. That one is no longer necessary, etc., etc. I asked about the Fiscal Working Committee that was done by ministerial decree. And then for my final question, I believe, given some of the measures that the minister presented on the various measures, is there a timing, a timeline, and again, general financial implications of these measures? This is what it will yield, and it's more than what we're getting now. It's less. So just some global financial implications. And Madam Chair Lady, that's what I would like to leave it with for today, or those questions at least. Thank you, Madam Chair Lady.
Thank you, MP Westcott Williams. Just as a reminder, Minister, we will go through all of the questions before I give you back the floor. Also, MP Westcott Williams, the cryptocurrency meeting, we held it on June 29th. So we did conclude that meeting at that time. And just to remind you that indeed, if we do want to proceed and have another meeting, then an additional request will have to come in for that. So I just wanted to clarify that. Perhaps I wasn't clear when I referred to that meeting last year in the first place. With that being said, I now give the floor to MP Gums.
Thank you, Madam Chair Lady, and good afternoon to you, my colleagues, to the Minister and his support staff, and to those joining us. Thank you, Minister, for the presentation. I just have three questions for now. Based on the feedback that were mentioned, Minister, from the stakeholders that you consulted, I recall that two of those points have already been mentioned since around 2020 by either the Ministry of Finance or previously the Ministry of TEAD. And that's namely the handling of the Airbnb situation and collaboration with the Friend side on tax harmonization. So if you could provide maybe a general update as to where the discussion is regarding both those topics. And then my third question was regarding entrepreneurship. What's the status of any government attempts to kind of resolve, for example, entrepreneurial access to online business avenues or payment systems, since that too, I think, would need to be taken into consideration regarding taxable income. And I'll leave it here for now, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, MP Gums. I look to MP Pontiflet. Do you have the floor?
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. Thank you very much. Also, thank you to the Minister for his presentation. Of course, good afternoon to my colleagues, those that are viewing. Madam Chair, I don't have really questions, maybe statements, and to see how to proceed with this matter. Madam Chair, what is important for me is that ways and means are being sought in order to generate revenues for St. Martin, but at the same time to ease the pressure on businesses and individuals. Madam Chair, the matter of, I believe was mentioned, tax holiday. I think that is one that definitely should be looked into, because fact of the matter is, as far back as maybe 12, 13 years ago, one of the things I had said as a member of the Island Council was that we cannot continue to give tax holidays because are we losing large amount of revenues, because what we know businesses do is they change the name of the company and they start all over again. You know, so I think, and I stated then that if the taxes are 25 or 35% or whatever that they would have to pay, let us cut it down to maybe 15 or 10, but you just can't abolish it altogether, because definitely we need those revenues. The Minister mentioned, Madam Chair, the matter of leakages, and indeed, again, it goes back to the issue of integrity on behalf of persons and businesses. Because, as the Minister said, if businesses said they did even better in 2021 and 2022, then why is it that this is not reflected in the coffers of government? And again, it takes me back again to the old report in 1997 when the Way Odessea report was made, in which it stated, and in that case, they identified casinos that were making 125 million guilders on an annual basis, but it was nowhere reflected in government coffers. I really hope that this 26-year-old report now, we could put it aside and actually collect that which is being generated on St. Martin in order for government to meet her responsibilities. Madam Chair, something that I brought up, and I probably might be for the Minister of Economic Affairs, has to do with the issue of a presentation that was done by the SHTA, and during that presentation, I brought up the matter of an invoice where a particular hotel or hotels were charging their guests VAT, and also city tax. And when I asked the question to the then, I think the chair, the director of SHTA, he said it was maybe a mistake, we have to look into it, but I did not get any further notification on this matter, so I think I should pursue it further with the Minister of Economic Affairs as to why were they being charged VAT, and also being charged city tax. Madam Chair, something that I hope really comes to the forefront and is finally finalized is the issue of the Casino Gaming Board. Because indeed, again, without a gaming board in place, we don't have enough control as to the functioning of the casinos, and I'm sure we are losing millions and millions of guilders in revenues. The lottery fees, again, that's another matter that came up in 2011 during our budget meeting, when I asked the question as to why is it that from 1998 to 1989 that the casinos and the lottery institutions were paying the same fees. It has not changed to date. So definitely, I really hope that definitely legislation come to us in order for us to adjust those fees. Interesting, Madam Chair, and when I'm talking about the issue of generating revenues, on February the 1st, I had the pleasure of celebrating my 46th anniversary, and we went to a particular restaurant, and while sitting there, I looked and I saw a yacht, not in the lagoon, but close by to where the restaurant is located. And I decided to look at the name, and the name of the yacht was the North Star. So just for curiosity's sake, I decided to Google North Star. And interestingly, Madam Chair, what I found was that particular yacht is rented for $430,000 a week. $430,000 a week. $430,000 a week, and it's parked in our waters, not too far, about maybe 10 minutes or less from the restaurant. And I'm saying, again, looking when I drive along the hill at Simpson Bay and so on, I see our lagoon, they're filled with these humongous yachts. And I'm asking, where's the money going, Madam Chair? Where is the money going? What is the responsibility of SLAC when it comes to this? So, Madam Chair, indeed, we look at the tax matters, but we have to make sure that those who are not paying, that they're also brought into the equation. Madam Chair, another question, and just one question I have as a matter of fact, is the issue of the fees, because I always complain that we charge too much for the yachts to come into our lagoon, so most of them go to the French side. So it'd be interesting to see exactly how much is actually charged, because and they say Google isn't always correct, but I just Googled what is charged, and what I came up with was $77 per person. I do understand that. I'm talking about the yacht itself. How much are they charged? But Google is talking about persons, so definitely I'll let it get an answer on that if it's possible, and then I'll just leave it there for now. But I believe that governors on the right track, ministers on the right track. We have to ensure that persons pay their fair share so we become more independent where finances are concerned. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, MP Pontiflet. Before I proceed to the next member of parliament, I would like to take a 5-minute adjournment. Thank you. Welcome back to this Committee of Finance meeting. The next MP is Member of Parliament, MP Westcott Williams. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair Lady. Madam Chair Lady, since you have determined that all questions will be asked, I wanted to put in a few extra ones before the minister goes over to the answering. And that would be the minister also indicated in his presentation next steps, and I would like the timeline of those steps which are to be taken. And specifically, I'm interested in when the minister is coming back to Parliament. And while I understand his proposal of taking what he gets here and then going back to the ministry, the work group, then the Council of Ministers, is there anything more specific than what the minister presented this morning that can be shared with Parliament in terms of the content or the proposals of these different measures? Did I miss it, or no further reference was made to what the Parliament of St. Martin had received some time ago as part of the Road to Economic Recovery Plan by the government of St. Martin, and that included an elaborate outline of a so-called transaction tax? Was it under anything that I saw the minister present there that maybe this comes back or not? And I referred earlier to the issue of the linkage between the economic development, hence my reference to that plan as well, and the fiscal environment of St. Martin. And has the minister, in his discussions with stakeholders or departments of government, heard anything regarding the need to deal with the matter of competition that our open economy provides so much of, in terms of, again, putting it back to small business? Has any discussion been had in this context with respect to regulating, if you wish, the competition? And I know that the Ministry of TIAT has been looking at economic zoning, and I want to know if in the Minister of Finance, financial/fiscal plans, if this is something that will come out, especially given the minister's focus on the, again, small and I would even say micro, small and medium enterprise on St. Martin, even as far as cottage industry on St. Martin, et cetera. And Minister, I don't need a report per se. With my ears to the ground, you hear what our small business, micro business, et cetera, is going through. So I just wanted you to know that in concluding, Madam Chair Lady.
Thank you, MP Westcott Williams. I give the floor to MP Angelique Rumu. You have the floor.
Pleasant good morning to you, Madam Chair Lady, to our SG present, and of course to our Honorable Minister, his support staff, my colleague MPs, the viewing and listening public. Minister, I would like to, through you, Madam Chair Lady, I would like to thank the Minister for the presentation on the Ministry's vision in regards to tax reform. I am keen, however, to hear from you, Minister, on the vision behind improving the process of filing taxes in the broadest sense, on both the side of government and the side of the residents. For example, redundancies that may exist in sending out tax notices. How do we educate and how can we educate and inform the public on taxes? Better assisting residents when they are filing their taxes, especially at the tax office. So yes, the discussion here is tax reform, but I would also like to hear about reforming the process of filing taxes so it is more efficient and user-friendly for the people of St. Martin. And I missed, through you, Madam Chair Lady, from the Minister, the Ministry's views on taxes, or should I say tax exemptions for seniors. With inflation and continuous increase in food prices and cost of living, I would definitely love to hear what collaborative discussion we can have with you, Minister, and include this as a part of the tax reform vision for St. Martin. And regarding the tax scheme for MSMEs, can the minister go more in detail and explain so that they can understand what is coming to benefit them? And I would also like to compliment the minister on the elimination of transfer tax for the first-time homeowners and the importance of that. I would like to thank you, Madam Chair Lady, and I look forward to the answers from the minister. Thank you.
Thank you, Member of Parliament Ramu. MP Grisha Heiliger Martin, you have the floor.
A pleasant good afternoon to you, Madam Chair, Secretary General, Ms. Anne Groen. A pleasant good afternoon to you. And good afternoon to the Minister of Finance and his support staff, and good afternoon to those listening and viewing online. First of all, Madam Chair, I want to remind the Minister that Parliament is still waiting on written responses to my letters of April 25th, August 19th, and November 1st. I just wanted to put that out since the Minister requested that information. I would like to just reiterate that my letters of April 25th, August 19th, and November 1st is still pending. These letters, Madam Chair, contain questions and suggestions related to St. Martin's short-term, medium, and long-term financial economic situation. It also includes tax reform. Madam Chair, I don't know why Parliament has not received any responses to these letters as yet, but obviously I can see based on the presentation today that the Minister is still in his initial stages to present us with a tax reform. Or maybe the Minister expects Parliament to look for answers on Google. I'm not sure from what it is, but whatever it is, today it seems to me that the reasons is that the Minister doesn't seem to have a clear, comprehensive plan on a divine vision for the country, because he's obviously, based on what we saw today, it was still in his initial stages. But whatever the reasons are, Madam Chair, for not responding, it is yet another unfortunate example of the total disregard for certain ministers, from certain ministers for the people of St. Martin and us as their elected representatives. We are in serious financial situation right now, Madam Chair. But it doesn't seem that the minister realizes this. I get that feeling, that strange feeling. It doesn't seem that he is capable of addressing the urgent matters at hand in a timely manner. Let me just name a few. The amendment of the 2022 budget, the balancing of the 2023 budget, the repayment of the COVID-19 related loans from the Netherlands, the covering of St. Martin's 1 billion guilder national debt in future budgets. These are very, very serious, looming issues, Madam Chair. So through you, I would like to ask the Minister, why hasn't Parliament received responses to my questions and suggestions as yet? And does the Minister still intend to do so? And if so, when? And if not, why not? Madam Chair, I again urge the Minister to also take the business of the people seriously and respect this House as a legislator, and respond to the letters from Parliament in a serious and timely manner. I therefore hope that the pending letters will be answered before the handling of the budget of 2023. With regards to the presentation that the Minister presented today, I have the following initial questions. Can Parliament be provided with a position paper that has been prepared? Further to the questions by my colleagues, MP Westcott Williams, with regards to what extent has the economic recovery plan been taken into account, specifically the transaction tax? Has that also been taken into account? And how will our relationship with the northern side of the island be taken into account, specifically when it comes to the implementation of an import tax and abolishing our duty-free status? How will this affect our business community on the southern side of the island? Is that also taken into consideration in your initial stages? And has the geographical situation and location within the region been taken into account with regards to the competitive position. Thank you, Madam Chair Lady. I'd like to leave it at that for now.
Thank you, MP Heiliger Martin. Next member of parliament to have the floor is MP Bryson.
Yeah. Okay, great. Feedback. Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning to you once again, and good morning to my colleagues and the minister, who I would like to thank for the presentation that you've given here this morning. I think I do understand the methodology behind what you're saying. I think that is good legislative process. I mean, if the minister had been here today, let's say in a central committee meeting, just presenting legislation, as has been done in the past and failed, for example, with the Criminal Procedure Code, where if there's no sort of process where members of parliament can at least have the opportunity to be able to evaluate certain things, I think that opportunity definitely helps us to be able to that opportunity actually helps us to be able to figure out exactly what is coming from the government and also give our own feedback as well. Minister, as in your presentation, indeed, you are looking forward to some suggestions or feedback in regards to how you will be able to move forward with this. And I understand, again, your method. And for that reason, I think I am in agreement with basically most of what I've seen. There is one item that I didn't kind of see clearly addressed, which you were asked this question before, and it is a concern of the business community and several parliamentarians, including myself, is what is the position regarding, or what are the options you are leaning towards regarding an import duty? I am not a proponent of an import duty in its traditional sense. I do believe that there are other ways on a distribution level, so some sort of, for example, distribution tax or add a fee. So based on the size of your distribution company, how much goods you distribute, that a flat fee can be introduced to compensate. That it's not a tax at the harbor or at the port of entry, because one of the key things we have to consider is, one, the French side of the country and what the competitive disadvantage that can cause for us, but also what we're already seeing, even with some of the measures from customs coming into place, making it much more difficult for goods to leave the harbor. Adding such a duty, while I understand it's an easy way to say we're going to collect stuff, and it might be maybe easier said than done, but in actuality, I think we need to be careful about that. I do remember seeing that in the country package, and the minister saying that was not being taken up, but it would be good to get some confirmation on that. As members of parliament, we are co-legislators with the government, and my personal idea is that a general reform of the tax system should come how it is now, with the basic items and goals of where the government wants to go with it to be presented to parliament. We give our feedback, and the government then initiates that law. However, what we as members of parliament can do, it would be very difficult for a member of parliament to completely on their own initiate tax laws that totally change the system. But it's not that difficult for us to identify certain areas in the existing tax code that we can change by initiative ourselves. And I think that's something that is also important and something that our faction has been working on for quite some time. One of those, I will go over one of those incentives, and Minister, I will be sending this documentation, just as we've done in the past, to ask your fiscal affairs and others to evaluate the substance and feasibility of such deductions or improvements or increases in collections. But one such thing is what we've called a Landverordening Speciaal Tarief voor Afgestudeerden, so in English, a graduate head start, a special tariff for recent graduates. The idea behind this legislation is that the general sentiment is that many students do come back to St. Martin or want to come back to St. Martin, and I'm not saying it's the only reason they don't come back, but one of the key factors is what they call the money they take home. So they get a salary offering, and then by the time the taxes are reduced, it is so much lower than what they would get in another country, and so low compared to the cost of living in St. Martin, it does not become attractive for them to return. Our proposal in this amendment is to make an amendment to Article 23F of the wage tax ordinance, as well as Article 9 of the income tax ordinance, to create a clause for the possibility for those that have graduated within the last 3 years to be able to get a discount on, or basically a lower tax rate on their wage tax, so that their take-home money, like we call it, is more. The idea behind that is, yes, of course, we are giving an incentive to a group of people that would be paying lower taxes, so there's obviously a lower income from the government. But the way I see it is that this incentive to be able to bring home people, let's forget just for a minute the beautiful part of it, that students are now returning back home after graduating, but from just a fiscal perspective, they will now be a taxpayer in St. Martin. So while you're offering them a lower tax rate on wage tax, you would also still be collecting social premiums. They would be having economic activity. They would be able to rent an apartment. They would be able to have a car. So there is an economic incentive that turns right back in. I would like to ask the minister his opinion, not of course a full position, because like I said, he would have to look at the legislation to look at the nuances, but just in general, what does he feel about offering for the approximately, I believe we estimated between 110 to 130 per year that would qualify for such a discount. So I don't think it's going to break the bank of government, but it will have definitely a big impact on our society and our economy. But of course, like the minister mentioned, it is important to not just simply say we want to lower taxes, lower taxes, lower taxes. There needs to be a balance. However, the philosophy we have as the UP party is, as much as possible, to focus on, let's call it, taxing the untaxed. So finding out areas within our economy where we're not grabbing the necessary income that we should be. And the minister did mention Airbnb. I will come to that. But there's another area that has gone untaxed, and predominantly it is foreign nationals or foreigners that have properties in that are above a certain bracket, and we classify that based on their maintenance fee. And this is called the Landsverordening Condominium Heffing. This is an adjustment to the existing tax law to create a special definition for maintenance fees that are paid by condominiums over a certain value. So a condominium is, of course, we call it a condo, but in the eyes of the law, an apartment over a certain value. And the way we found to be able to easily identify, well, what the rate should be, is we did surveys at various condos in St. Martin to see what their maintenance fees are. And I was surprised to see how high they are. And this is going directly, of course, to the entity that is, maintaining the place, etc. But I think there's an opportunity to have a percentage applied, maybe 5%, 10%, something like that. And based on that amount, there can be now something that is also going to the government of St. Martin, because just like the condo needs to maintain their own facility so that these people can enjoy the condo, well, also the government needs to maintain our island. We need to beautify, we need to keep it clean. The same thing the condo is doing by charging a maintenance fee. I believe a percentage can be added on top of that, nothing to dissuade anyone from purchasing a property in St. Martin, of course. It would have to be done in close consultation with such entities, but I do think it's time that we find a way to get something out of what we estimate to be approximately, I had the figure here within the law someplace, I believe it was approximately 600 various units. And our estimate would be, based on our surveys of how much they are paying, that you'd be able to raise approximately 6.5 million guilders a year if you take what they're actually paying on maintenance fees and put 7%. In addition to that, Minister, so just your feedback, general feedback on that. The minister is also aware of a draft that we had prepared, which is originally it was called the Landsverordening Gezondheidsheffing, and having taken into account the feedback from the Council of Advice as well as the government of St. Martin, Minister Otley has since taken this over and is trying to convert it, in his time as Minister of TIAT, into a sort of a tourist levy, something that is charged to tourists arriving into the country, and that it would be tied directly to the ED card, which is something that the United States do. You pay $14 for your ESTA, and that actually goes directly towards tourism. A lot of people don't know that, but on a federal level, that goes towards marketing the United States of America. I believe that we should do something like that, and I would like to hear from the minister his thoughts on that. And finally, Also with the changes, and one of the things that we, in previous discussions on tax reforms, I did point out to the minister, the importance of not abolishing the hotel tax ordinance and simply integrate it into the turnover tax, because I do believe there needs to be a different rate, what locals are paying, so the turnover tax that we are paying, but what tourists are then paying. As I've mentioned many times before, St. Martin has the lowest hotel tax in the entire Caribbean. We are at 5%. This is very low, and it definitely should be, I wouldn't say we should exceed the Caribbean average, which is 11.5%, but it should be definitely much higher than 5%. So for this reason, we've taken it upon ourselves by initiative draft to actually make that adjustment there. But of course, it was necessary to go into consultation with stakeholders, and we did have a meeting with the SHTA to discuss that adjustment. The general sentiments is, of course, we know that the hotel sector will always be somewhat resistant to an increase in hotel tax. But the compromise that we think we're able to find with the hotel sector is that if two things can take place, one, the funds, or at least the majority of the funds, goes towards tourism marketing. So if you increase it from 5 to 8%, and the proposal is to have it from 5 to 8% from 1st of April 2024, then to 10% by 1st of April 2025, then to 11% by the 1st of April 2026. That would allow the economy to make the necessary adjustments and not to have it be too heavy of an increase. But one of the things that I think they correctly point out is that the hotel tax in the national ordinance, when you read the definition of a hotel and who the taxpayer of hotel tax is, it is a license holder of a lodging, so a hotel. So technically speaking, there's a lot of legal challenges in actually assessing existing people, which I know the minister has probably encountered those challenges, and so has Airbnb. So I believe it's time to include specifically in the Loger Gastenbelasting law a clause that would amend Article 1A to actually use the term, which we abbreviate as ODM. And an ODM is defined as Online Deeleconomie Woningen Marktplaats. That's English for online sharing economy, which is the definition for things like VRBO, Booking.com, etc. Having that now defined in the law makes it clear that the taxpayer is also those that use such services. So I think it's important for us to add that to the law and then make sure that the compliance is there. And I do believe that once this happens, it will be easy for the minister to now enter into a tax collection agreement because the legal basis for that does exist. In my meeting with the SHTA, there was some hesitation initially about that when I explained to them the challenges that the minister has with regards to Airbnb. And in my response, after that meeting, they did send a response, and they did state as follows. After consulting with St. Martin tax experts, your assumption that Airbnb dues collection via our current law is a complemented matter seems not to be overstated. Next to dimensions of legal changes, the dimension of Airbnb being a foreign entity also comes into play. And I think it's good that this is something I've heard the minister saying, because people have been asking, well, when are we going to do the Airbnb? But you even have the stakeholders understanding in our current tax system, it is not as simple as just telling Airbnb, take the 5% and deposit it by the tax office. Our current tax system does not allow for that, but I do believe this necessary change, making it payable that the ODMs can withdraw it and pay it directly to the government of St. Martin, will create the legal definition for that. And then that evens the playing field where stakeholders as hotels can feel, okay, if we are now paying 8% and they are also paying 8%, now the playing field is level. However, one other point that was brought up by the SHTA as well, and I do fully agree with, is that we should ensure, or wherever possible, actually make it within the law that the funding does go, well, of course, by motivated, if there's an emergency or whatever, by national decree, you can deviate, but that the tourism budget should be at least equal to that of what is collected in hotel tax and timeshare tax. That is what Aruba does, that is what Puerto Rico does, that is what many countries does, because it creates a recirculation where you collect from the tourist, you invest it in tourism marketing, you then get more tourists to the country, they then pay more taxes, and that circle continues. So I do believe that our hotel taxes should be reinvested into the tourism economy, because it benefits everyone. It's a win-win situation for the government, for the tourists, knowing that it's going towards marketing and product improvement. It's good for the stakeholder because they know that the money they're paying is coming back to give them more business. And I believe that method would be a win-win-win for all. Finally, Madam Chair, I also do want to ask the minister, and it's something that, of course, you are very familiar with regards to the transaction tax. I think that that was something that had a huge potential and still can have a huge potential to a very easy to comply tax done via the banking system, similar to the 1%. I understand there were some challenges, but can the minister please give us an update on that? I am still a proponent of the introduction of the transaction tax that you had spearheaded. I think it's not something that we should just brush aside. On the contrary, I think it's something that we should try wherever possible to see if it is something realistic for us to implement. We understand the difficulty of, from a compliance perspective that you have on an income tax, but if you have something that is within the banking system and they simply have to remit it to the tax department, you're basically counting on a 100% tax compliance rate with a transaction tax, not to mention the many, many other benefits that we've discussed many times here in Parliament already. So is there any room to still have that? And also speaking about that, Madam Chair, you also would recall the economic recovery plan that was presented to the Council of Ministers and the Parliament. Can the minister please provide us with that, or if there's an updated version or anything related to the economic recovery plan, and especially the aspects of tax reform within that and how that fits within the vision that you've presented or want to move forward with? I think it's important to see what was there and what we can use or what maybe you feel the need to deviate from. Let me just double check. I do believe that is all. Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you, thank you, Minister.
Thank you, MP Bryson. I look to MP Bijlani. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair Lady. Good afternoon to you. Good afternoon to the Griffier, the Honorable Minister, supporting staff, and my colleagues here. Thank you for your presentation, Minister. It was a wonderful book. I just wrote I'm reading the chapters, but when I'm going to the pages, I don't have much details. So I would like to get some extra details on just the headings that you have mentioned here. That will help to know exactly how you come to those points and what kind of help Parliament can dive into. I think basically a lot of questions have been asked, but I have something different to talk about, is the tax assessments. How far can we go? 5 years, 10 years, 15 years? A lot of complaints I got is they're getting assessments from last 10 years ago, and they have proofs that they have paid. And to rectify those things is taking long. So the headache they are going through this is an extra issue. So please look into those assessments, and can you rectify until when can we go back? Because I've heard years that it just resonates to me that are we in what country that we are going back 15, 20 years in tax assessments? I know we have a lot of receivables. Going back beyond 5 years, can you give me a yearly breakdown of tax receivables? So 2017 and back, if at all you still maintain those. I would like to know, through you, Chair Lady, the breakdown from the taxes received from companies which are under 500K and companies which go beyond 500K of their total revenue. So companies which fall under 500K, like you just mentioned that there's a tax break or something for people doing under 75K per year. So if you can get those kind of figures. Going through your presentation, what struck me was the various measures, and especially the line lowering profit tax and abolish surcharges. I would like to really get more depth into it because what we are hearing and reading in newspaper that Curacao has lowered the profit tax, and there might be something that the ministry knows more into that and we don't know. So I would like you to come out with that kind of thing. Why is it there and why we cannot do it? You mentioned that in the past couple of years, many stakeholders told you they had the best year. Of course, there were businesses who really made good money with these pandemic situation, but there are many businesses who suffered. So are you coming with category-wise? And this was my request to you from last 4 or 5 years, if you can let me know the revenues, how we are getting the taxes through category, through district, so we can evaluate where it is good, where it is bad, that we can improve. I would like to get those kind of figures categorically with the type of businesses we have, or district-wise, some kind of a breakdown so we can evaluate where we are finding our problems and where we are doing excellent. Basically, those will be my questions and awaiting your answers. Thank you, Chair Lady.
Thank you, MP Bijlani, and all the members of Parliament beforehand for all of your questions. Before I pass the floor on to you, Minister Arian, I would like to pose a couple questions myself, because I'd like to paint a picture a little bit for the public when it comes to our tax system and structure here. Since 2010, we delved, or we shifted into where we determine our own tax percentages once we moved out of the Netherlands Antilles. And since then, it was in 2012, we started off on the same level. So St. Martin, and I'll go specifically on profit tax. St. Martin started off at a profit tax of 34.5% when it came to companies. And since then, Curacao had adjusted theirs back in 2012 to somewhere around 27, 25%, between 25 and 27%, until last year where it's down now to 22%. So the point that I'm trying to make is, you see from 2010, since we shifted our status, it moved from 34.5% in Curacao to 22%. We have stayed at the same level. So just for clarification purposes, this is why you will hear me publicly saying that our tax system sometimes is a little bit absurd. And it's absurd because here we are encouraging small businesses to exist, and you have done a significant amount of job, Minister, a significant amount of work in tandem with other ministries to really promote the development of the SMEs, the micro, small, and medium SMEs. But our absurd tax system makes it really difficult for them to register as a company. They are hit with advice that would come to them saying, hey, I know that most of us want to go into businesses for ourselves because the purpose is to make money, but you see, when you have this amount of profit tax and when you have this amount of TOT, it's absurd. That's my reason for it being absurd. You have to pay 5% TOT on your monthly revenues, and then at the end of the year, you have to pay 34.5% profit tax. So the absurdity of our system, it makes it really uninviting to want to invest here. So we have this contradiction that we're trying to make it attractive for investors. We're trying to make it attractive for persons that are going into business on their own for the first time, yet the absurdity of the system makes it very difficult to succeed. With that being said, I will share the stories with you numerous times, on numerous occasions, and again in the future. I have had stories directly in my role when I sat over there as a minister of TEAT, and still to this day, that persons are being advised by their accountants, by their account advised managers, that when they're doing their tax assessments, that they shouldn't make this much profit because they have so much so much taxes to pay. Do you understand the absurdity of our system? You are being advised when you're trying to go into business on your own to not disclose this much. And I know I'm saying something that is borderline a little bit almost bold, but that is the reality of the tax structure and the tax regime that we exist in. And what I would like to know is, we are in the year 2023. Knowing that we have changed since 2010, why has it taken so long to even adjust anything? This is not directly at you only, Minister. It is looking at the entire 13 years or 12 and a half years since we changed our structure. A simple thing as what you were saying in your proposal of eliminating land tax, lowering wage tax. There's so many things that we could have done to assist our community. Multiple times in a Committee of Finance meeting, everyone has heard me say that taxes are what we pay for civilized society. The reason we have a disgruntled community here is because the ones who are actually paying, don't really see a return on their taxes being paid because we have crappy roads. They don't see enough investment in our infrastructure. They are complaining about the education system. I can go on and on and on, Minister. So when you do give us these answers, I would really like to get to understand why it's taken so long for anything to happen. By all means, I will go back to your various measures, which I hope that you will share with the public, because it's also not what we received here to start. And just like the last MP who spoke said, give us a little bit more information on it, because there's some things here that would receive a lot of support because it would help improve the lives of our people here. But I want to be realistic in actually implementing them, in making them actionable, because the last time we had any significant reform or discussion being provided was in 2015, and to date, nothing's been done. Nothing's been done to that big staple of paper that went to the government building, talking about the same various measures that you presented here today, because they're not new ideas. They're absolutely not new ideas. They're just a regurgitation of stuff that has not been able to be assessed and enforced or even actioned on. So that's what I want us to be realistic on what our deliverables are. I want to say something about tax exemptions. What I will ask you again for a little bit more clarification, because in the various measures, you mention the withdrawal of land tax, the exemption transfer tax first homeowners, and as well as abolishment of inheritance and gift tax. I just want us to see if we could, when we come back in, Minister, I would make a suggestion that perhaps you give an example of those. Because when you were talking about an inheritance perhaps being land, which goes to a land transfer tax, I just want us to walk through the example for public consumption as well. Because for us, we're used to this discussion for public consumption since we have all these meetings public, that you can go into that a little bit more. Another thing that I heard today, several members of Parliament have mentioned an economic recovery plan. The plan that I presented while I was Minister of TEAT was a path to economic recovery. And the suggestion in that path to economic recovery is about indirect taxes. That's what it was about. So if we're going to keep talking about a transfer tax, I really wish sometimes that when I was there, it was brought up as much as it did. But alas, we are where we are today. But I want you to explain that the ease in which we exist is to go to indirect taxes. That's what should be happening for our collection purposes. I heard a member of Parliament said taxing the untaxed. I think when we're looking at revenue collection for this country, we have to keep in balance what we are providing to our citizens as well as what we are collecting. So to make it a little bit more fair, and when you're talking about taxing the untaxed, it makes it look as if you're going after people who don't pay. The reality here is that you've always heard people say that the same people pay taxes over and over and over and over again. Our system, Minister, we know we have been waiting for this tax reform meeting for quite some time. Our system needs to be revamped. It is 12 years too late for it. And I hope that over our various measures, you take into consideration the reality of our existing by impact revenue in. Give you the time.
Thank you for your questions, members of parliament. More time for answering the questions, but I would like to make a couple of comments though, if I may. And it's unfortunate that MP Heliga Martin isn't here at the moment, but I'd like to start with her comments in regards to the letters. In addition to the letters, we also had meetings based on those letters, which we did basically answer most of those questions, but we will be sending those letters in writing. In addition to that, this is a tax meeting, and I did hear questions about the budget and having a balanced budget and so forth, and these things are coming. The budget will be discussed this year. In addition to that, mentioning a vision for tax improvement and so forth. And that's in particular why we call it tax improvements. I heard you refer to tax reform, but we're calling it tax improvements because it's not a tax reform. We're not reforming the whole tax system. And if the MP was paying attention, we mentioned, for example, all the taxes that we're going to abolish. It's the MP's job to go and see what those taxes are and how they affect the community. It's not my job to go and explain every single tax. If we mention, for example, inheritance tax, does the MP want me to break that down in here, or is it also responsibility of the MP to go and see what inheritance tax is and so forth, and why is it beneficial or not to leave or not? In here, we presented what we plan to do. On the other end, which we got from most other MPs, I expect to hear, well, this is the reason why I'm for this, a position of parliament. We said this is our position paper, all right, the position presentation, what we want to do, and we would have heard the position of members of parliament today also, like you stated in your conclusion. And you said a couple of things, which I 100% agree on the majority. And it's hard sometimes not to go back to why we're here today. And again, MP Sarah Wiska-Williams isn't here either, but she will be the only one, I think, that was in power for a majority of that time that you mentioned, from 2010 up until now. When you mentioned 2015, 2012, yes, I agree. We could and should have started and done a lot of these things already. You mentioned profit tax, and that's one of the first things we mentioned, lowering the profit tax. So I do agree with you. In 2020, we did start a process of trying to lower profit tax. In 2021, outside of the whole improvements, and at that point in time, you had to balance it out with revenue. It was during a pandemic. It was very hard to do, but it was an item at that time. We decided, listen, the island is at its lowest point, right? We know businesses aren't making money, right? This will be the opportune time for us now to lower profit tax. But it is, as you mentioned, one of the areas, the key areas that we are looking to lower. And yes, you emphasize and stress on you didn't say micro, but and I know you also include, in general, include the micro businesses, the micro, medium, small businesses. And that's why one of the first discussions with the tax group, the working group, this was not something that they included, something that I included. I said, listen, I want to make sure that bus drivers, taxi drivers, micro, medium, and small businesses, we ease the burden on them. And that's why we have that's why we included the small business scheme, which would allow, like I said, I don't want to give a fixed number because that number hasn't been established yet, but let's say, for example, businesses, small businesses, American businesses that make up to 75,000 guilders, they just wouldn't even have to file. So that eliminates a whole process for them. So that, again, not everything that is on here is regurgitated because these are new items also, especially the one for transfer tax for new homeowners. Previously, we also indicated, because I want this done as fast as possible also, we indicated that we would start with the legislation. It was on request of the MP, some MPs that, hey, no, come back to Parliament again. We are ready to start legislation today, Madam Chair. So if that's the mandate that we want to go, because I agree with you, we should start today. All right, I would want that in January 2024, I come back to Parliament with legislation ready for Parliament to approve. But we can't get there if every week you have to come back to Parliament to discuss a few key items on a couple of laws with members of Parliament, some of them not even prepared to have a discussion today. So I would like for us to continue work on this legislation. We have the team together, we have the team ready, and they are eager to start because we all want to see this happen. And I do agree with you that your last statements on indirect taxes, yes, that is the direction we have to go. Indirect taxes, it's sort of, let's say, less visible for the general consumer, but we also pick up on, because you asked me to explain, we're split on two different countries, French and Dutch. If we want to lessen the burden on our people and capture more of the tourists, the 500 still-over guests, the 1-point-something million cruise passengers that come over, then we have to go to indirect taxes. If you want to capture some of the non-legal migrants on the island, right? Because at some point in time, everyone must purchase, consume, right? So the fact, if we do go over to more indirect taxes, we should see an increase in revenues where we can better fix roads and schools and healthcare and so forth, things we want to do. Everyone that comes from the French side to purchase or consume on the Dutch side, we will capture that also in indirect taxes. So I do agree with you. Yes, the focus should be on indirect taxes because we will see an increased revenue and more than likely, more people will contribute. Yes, there was also comment on import duties. We didn't discuss import duties in our document because import duties is something that has to be discussed in collaboration with the French side, coming back to the point of MP Gums. We've had a few stakeholder sessions with the French side in regarding import duties, sin tax, and taxes in general. But we can't have a tax that gives an advantage to our competitors without proper discussion. So import duties is not on our current agenda, but we are gathering data on that. So what is coming into the port? There's also a lot of discussions on price control and so forth. We can't have proper price control or even come up with schemes and so forth unless you know what's actually coming into the port. Typically, every country that has import duties has a system in place like ASACUDA or similar, which registers all incoming goods, where they can now know, okay, on this item it's this price, and we could cap it at 20% and so forth. So it is important for us, even if we don't have import duties applied on the island, we should have the systems in place to at least capture the data for the future notices. Yes, I will take your advice on coming back on a few items to give better explanation, a more detailed explanation. And we will start the process after this meeting and based on the feedback we had on the process of starting legislation. I believe that that's key. And at the end of the day, all legislation has to come out to Parliament. And actually, it's our prerogative of ministers to actually start legislation. and not that typically Parliament to sit on the seat of ministers to be involved in the concept of legislation on a day-to-day task. So we will proceed with our task, and we will come back here with the legislation for the members of Parliament. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister, for so clearly pointing out which members of Parliament were not present. And I see that we have the return of MP Westcott Williams, so that I can clarify that for public consumption as well. Also, thank you very much for clarifying that you use the term reform instead of improvement. But, just for posterity, reform means making changes to anything in order to improve it. So I guess we are both right in that instance. What I would like to find out from you, just for clarification here, is you answered some of the questions just now, Minister, which means that you already started the process. But I don't know if you took note of which questions you answered. They were predominantly mine, which I appreciate. But please let me know how much time you are going to need in order to come back to answer the rest of the questions. We will adjourn the meeting for 2 minutes so that we can have a sidebar. Welcome back after that break of us deciding the best way forward for the minister to return to answer those questions. It has been agreed that we will return in the next meeting week to receive the remaining answers from the Minister of Finance, as well as any follow-up clarifications that may come as a result of that. Thank you, Minister of Finance, for you and your team coming here today to give us this presentation and providing our introduction to the tax improvement plan. Ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of this meeting. Correct. We have come to the end of this meeting to adjourn until the following meeting week for us to continue. Thank you very much.